when I had just graduated from college. I had just graduated not too long, and I went to Hardin-Simmons here, graduated in 1998. I just graduated. I was living in a house with a roommate that I had for several years in college, and we were living together, both obviously single, having our first jobs, and not having a lot of places to spend our money, for getting your first paycheck and those kind of things. And my roommate was really big into mountain biking. He had gotten really big into road biking and also mountain biking. And so I got to watch him and got to hear his stories and see him. And so we were one week, we were just kind of sitting around the house, and I thought, it'd be really great to go mountain biking. That sounds something that I would do, something that would be fun. I need to get out of the house and some recreation or whatever. And he was like, oh yeah, that would be great. He's like, I'll have a friend who has a bike, and I can get you his bike, and we can go ride. And I'm thinking, I know how to ride a bike. I've ridden a bike since I was probably 4 or 5. I've ridden a bike. I've done that pretty much my whole life. Now, college, I didn't really ride a bike a lot because mine got stolen at college. But I've ridden a bike for lots of years. This shouldn't be too difficult, right? We're going to go out, ride a bike, go on some hills or whatever. And so he gets the bike for me. The weekend comes. We load up in his truck, and we go out near Lake Fort Phantom, and there's some trails out there. And so I start putting on the gear. First of all, I couldn't figure out how to clip into the deal. I'm like, what happened to just pedals, right? When we have pedals, you have to clip in, and then you have to put on all the body armor, right? The helmets, which, I make my kids wear helmets, but let's be honest, 80s and 90s, nobody was wearing goofy helmets, right? And so putting on the helmet, because that's the safe thing to do, and apparently it wasn't safe back in the day. My parents didn't really care about head injuries or whatever. No, so I'm just kidding. So we would do that, got all ready to go, and I'm thinking, we're riding a bike. So, we start going down the trails, and it's not too difficult at first. We're kind of going through some trails, and then all of a sudden, he's in front of me, and all of a sudden I see him, and then the next second he just disappears, and he's gone. I'm thinking, this cannot be good. I don't know what's coming up. And so I get up, you're going, I don't know how fast we're going, but fast enough that we're moving. And then the next thing I know, I'm going head over heels over the front part of the bicycle, and I'm flipping over, and the bike's going all over the place. And this is like 5 minutes in. I'm thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know what is happening. I thought we were just going to go for a bike ride. I didn't think this was going to be that difficult. So I had no major injuries, and he comes back half laughing, half wondering if I'm okay. And so we get up again. So we go around, and we start cruising. 5 minutes in, again, I'm thinking we've been riding a bike for 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, I can't breathe. This is much more difficult than I thought. And so we've just been going for a little bit, and I finally catch up to him. I'm like, Chris, I've got to take a break already. I'm exhausted. He's like, okay, we'll just go around this corner, and then we'll climb up, and we'll be right back at the truck, and we can take a little break. And so we get around, and we get to this hill. And I don't remember exactly how long it was, but in my mind, remembering it seems like it was about 5 miles of about a 45-degree incline. I'm sure it wasn't that bad, but I was like, this is going to be incredible. And so I gear down or up or whatever, where you're pedaling as fast as you can, and I make it not halfway, and I have to jump off the bicycle, and I have to, with my head down, head between my tail between my legs, and I'm walking up, and he's up there again, just standing, laughing at me, and I get up there, and literally, I drop the bike, and I just fall over on my back, and I'm like, I can feel there's no blood left in my body. It's all gone. I'm just completely white. I feel like I'm going to throw up, and I feel like I've never ridden a bike before in my life, and I'm thinking, what? I thought we were just going to go on a bike ride. Last week, Kevin talked about evangelism, and as I sat and listened, I think about sharing the gospel. I think some of us, it's a little bit like that. So we can hear a message, and we think, man, yes, I believe all of those things that you say, and I know that the gospel is powerful, and I've lived with the gospel, and I've experienced the gospel, and I've talked to people occasionally, but then when we got to leave this building and actually go out there and do it and put ourselves in the mix of that, it can be like, man, what is going on? I didn't know if this was going to be this hard or this difficult, and we just, maybe even hearing about it, you just start thinking, man, what is going on? It doesn't seem like it should be that difficult. Like it seems it seems like, it's just, you're just talking to people and sharing the gospel. When it actually comes to doing it, I think for a lot of us, there's fear and there's just a lot of things that just kind of keep us from sharing the gospel. And this morning, what I want to do is just kind of take another step from last week and Kevin talking about us sharing the gospel. And I want to look at a text in Colossians that I'm hoping will help us all as we're thinking about being a church that wants to live and share the gospel. We want to leave from this place and share about the goodness of Jesus Christ, that he loves us, that he came to die for us. And so this morning, I'm hoping that you'll be encouraged and really just kind of getting ready for that. See, the problem with me with riding the bike and going out to mountain bikes is because I hadn't really prepared myself for that. I just thought I could get out there and do it. And in some ways, evangelism, yes, you've got to do it, but there are some things that we should be doing in preparation as we're thinking about sharing the gospel. And so this morning, I'm hoping we'll be better prepared, better equipped in thinking about moving forward and leaving this place and sharing the gospel. So Colossians chapter 4. So just before we read the text, it's just verses 2 through 6. I just kind of want to give you an overview of Colossians. So Colossians chapter 1 and chapter 2, Paul is basically building the framework for the gospel. He is teaching them about Christ. Probably one of the better known passages, Colossians chapter 2, one of my favorite passages. And when Paul is, Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, when Paul just really lays out this beautiful description of who Christ is. And I want to read this because we're skipping to the end of the letter. And if we're going to do that, we need to understand what's happening because we're missing a lot of the meat of where Paul is coming from. And we're going to get in really to some commands today. But before we get to the commands, we need to understand the foundation that Paul has already built on. Or it's just going to seem like works. It's just going to seem like we got to do this. Because it's just what we have to do. And if we don't understand there's a foundation from which it precedes or that it comes from, then it's going to be better. So I just want to read this quickly, just so you can see it. Colossians 1, chapter 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. He's talking about Jesus Christ. Verse 16, because by him everything was created in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile everything to himself by making peace through the blood of his cross, whether things on earth or things in heaven. Verse 21, and you were once alienated and hostile in mind because of your evil actions. But now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. If indeed you remain grounded and steadfast in the faith and are not shifted away from the hope of the gospel that you heard. The gospel has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and I, Paul, have become a minister of it. Just a beautiful description of the gospel, of who Jesus Christ is, who he has always been, his part in creation, that he has created all of us, and then ultimately that he paid the penalty for our sin. He died on the cross for our sin that we might be reconciled back to God. We were enemies. We were alienated from God. And Jesus Christ steps in and makes a way for us to be reconciled back to God. And then Paul kind of closes out and says that I have become a minister of the gospel. So the result is that what he has done in the gospel, that now we are the ministers of the gospel. And so first, chapter 1, chapter 2, just laying that foundation. And then chapters 3 and chapter 4, giving flesh to how we need to live that out. You see several lists of putting away the sins in our lives, and it kind of gives some lists. And then here in chapter 4, right at the very end, I love the ends of the letters because there's lots of exhortation that the authors give. There's particularly Paul, there's lots of like, okay, now that you know all of this, now that all of this is true, this is how you need to live. Just kind of a final like push, right? You know when you get to the end, if you ever get a letter if you're like me, if you get those letters in the mail, maybe not even personal letters, but not bills, but people want you to buy something or whatever, right? You just kind of skip, who's it from? And if you're like me, I just get through this. I want to know what they want, right? What is it that they want from me? And then I go back up and figure out what they're trying to say. This is kind of like what Paul is doing here. This is the push. All right, so chapter 4, verse 2. Devote yourselves to prayer. Stay alert in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open a door to us for the message to speak the mystery of the Messiah, for which I am in prison, so that I may reveal it as I am required to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the time. Your speech should always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. So Paul gives these commands, and what I want us to see before we jump in here is that they're all built around evangelism. They're all built around, or the context being the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like he talks about praying, and in a sense it seems like just being devoted to prayer in general. And that's probably true, but even we're going to dive into this, but you see he says that we're going to be praying for Paul and praying for us as you're praying for yourself. The implied Paul saying, as you're praying these things for yourself, also pray these things for us, that we would be able to share the gospel. And then the next one, when he talks about walking in wisdom towards outsiders so you make the most of your time. Well, what are you going to make the most of your time? Well, sharing the gospel, how you live your life. And then the last thing, your speech should be gracious so that you may know how you should answer each person. What are you giving an answer for? You're giving an answer for the gospel of Jesus Christ, the mystery of Christ. So all three of these commands or exhortations that we're going to see have themselves centered in the context of the gospel, of sharing the gospel. And so as Paul is closing out this letter and he's giving the readers kind of some exhortation, these three things that I'm really hoping for us this morning that we'll walk away from: steadfast prayer, wise conduct, and gracious speech. Those are the things that we're going to look at this morning. The first thing he says is you focus on the gospel, devote yourselves to prayer, stay alert with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open a door for the message to speak the mystery of the Messiah, for which I'm in prison, so that I may reveal it as I am required to speak. The first thing, and really the one that he spends the most time on in this section, is that you should be a people devoted to prayer. Now, prayer is just who you are. If we're going to think about leaving this place and sharing the gospel with people, you better find yourself devoted to prayer. And he kind of gives three characteristics. He gives three characteristics here of this devoted prayer that's going to help us. The first one he says is this idea of being devoted to something. I mean, this is a devoted prayer. This is something that you're going to be steadfast in. And if you've ever been a part of a sports team or a music a band or anything like that in your life, this idea of devotion is not something new, not something necessarily I have to explain. We know what it means to be devoted to something, giving your full self to something, giving all of who you are. Like, this is everything. You're fully devoted to this. Everything. Eat, sleep, drink, thinking about. This is how we should consider prayer. We're going to be fully devoted to praying. It's going to take persistence. When we are devoted to prayer, what happens is it's going to build within us discipline, and it's going to build within us patience. What Paul wants them to do is be devoted to prayer, because it's going to build within them this idea of really working hard, kind of an idea of a battle. Like, this is, you're in a battle. It's going to take full devotion. This is not something we're just kind of do whenever we get a chance. If you want to be successful, if you want to be someone who is obedient sharing the gospel, it must begin with prayer, and it must begin with a devoted or a consistent prayer life. You're praying consistently about the gospel. And then the next part there, he says, stay alert in it. The type of prayer that's needed for evangelism is an alert prayer or a watchful prayer. And if you remember last week, one of the things that I've been really rolling around on my mind is the idea of what Kevin talked about the watchman on the wall. This idea of being watchful in our prayer, that we're alert, we're paying attention of the things that really he's going to talk about in a minute, but people who need the gospel, opportunities to share the gospel, that we are people who are alert in our prayer. And I just, the reason I've been rolling this around, I don't know if you've ever had to be the watchman. One time we went out to play, I went with some college guys, and we went out to play paintball. And we went out to this guy's land, and they had already kind of built these two like bases or whatever. And so we divided up into teams, and I got with my team, and we went out to our base, and the other team went to their base. And so there's like 4 or 5 of us, and so we're devising strategy, right? This is what you do. And so we devised a strategy, and everybody was getting a job, right? Okay, you're going to be the guys that go forward, and you're going to sneak around and go this way, and then you're going to kind of be in the middle just in case they break through. And then Tim, you're going to be the guy that's going to stand back and defend the fort. Like, you're going to be the watchman, make sure no one comes into our fort. So everybody else is attacking, everybody else is advancing, and here I am waiting for the enemy to come to me. That was not very fun. I didn't like that job. It was lonely. First of all, it was like, no one's here. I'm by myself, and everybody else is getting gun. I can hear the paintball guns going off, and here I'm worried that someone's going to come up behind me because here I am kind of by myself. And I lasted about 5 minutes, and I left. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm gonna go. I don't want to be the watchman. This idea that being the watchman in prayer, that we are ready, that we are alert, and what it does whenever we decide that we are going to be this kind of prayer person, that we're going to pray that we're watching for the enemy to come to us, it's going to build our relationship with the Lord. It's going to build our dependence, because there's going to be times where it's lonely. There's going to be times in your prayer where you feel like, is anybody else praying for these things? Does anybody else want to share the gospel? And part of being the watchman is when, like we talked about, I'll be the one, I'll be the watchman. It's going to build this trust. It's going to build within us also a deep care for others. And we're devoted in our prayer, and we're also being watchful in our prayer. To be watchful also meaning you're going to have to be looking around at the world around you. You're going to be praying for others. If you're praying for other people, particularly people who don't have the gospel, it's going to build within you this deep care for them. Because you're devoted in prayer for them. You're praying for them often. You're going to start caring about them. It's not going to just be, oh yeah, I see them today. No, I've been praying for you all week. And so when you see them, it's like, okay, can I share the gospel? Can we do this? Because you've been praying for them. You've been thinking through them. You've been thinking about them. And then the last thing he says here about prayer is that we need to stay alert in our prayer with thanksgiving. Our prayers are going to be really, as we're praying for people and praying for the gospel, that we're going to also have this built in with us, this thanksgiving. I think what Paul is trying to articulate here is that we are, in our prayers, going to understand that we are totally and completely dependent on God. For us to share the gospel and for people to understand and experience the gospel is really truly for the Lord. It's going to build with us in a dependence, right? We're thankful to God because we depend on God to answer our prayers. We depend on God to hear our prayers and answer our prayers, for us to share the gospel, to see people come to Christ. And in our prayer, there's going to be built in this dependence as we see God working, as we see God moving, that we're going to be humbled and we're going to say, thank you, God. Thank you for allowing me to share the gospel. Thank you for this person coming into the God. Thank you for this. And what we understand is that God is the one who is ultimately in control. We're completely dependent on him. Because Paul, in the next part, he says these are the two things that he wants this people to be praying for him. And I think the implication here is, he says, as you're praying this at the same time, like as you're praying, as you're being devoted for prayer, you're going to pray this for us. I think there's an understanding here. If you're praying this for us, you probably should be praying it for yourself as well. And he says, pray that God may open a door for the message to speak the mystery so that we may reveal it as I am required to speak. He says, pray that we may speak the mystery of the Messiah. This is really important because this is kind of something that's been happening through Colossians. And he says, pray that we might declare the mystery of the gospel. And he gives two things here that he wants them to pray for. The first one is just the opportunity, the open door, right? They're praying for the chance. Paul said, pray for me. Pray that God would give me opportunity to share the gospel. If we want to be a people who are going to leave this place and share the gospel with people around us, we need to be praying and asking the Lord, God, will you give me opportunity? Will you give me a chance? Will you put someone here for me? God, will you allow me to see the people around me that are every day around me, the chances for me to share the gospel? Would you give me an opportunity? And this is particularly for Paul because he's in prison, so it's a little bit different for him. But you don't see Paul making an excuse because he's in prison. Well, here I am in prison. You know, I see the same guys pretty much every day. And there's no excuses. I want opportunity, even in the midst of being in prison. Well, what about us? We live every day and we have these people around us. Are we praying, God, give me the opportunity? We have opportunities really all around us. Well, God, can you just let me do this? And then he says, we'll also be praying for clarity to share the gospel. It says, may I reveal it, or you're trying to make it clear. God, when you give me that opportunity, will I also be able to share the gospel clearly? Will I be able to share this in such a way that people will understand it, that people will see it, that people will see the goodness of the gospel? And in particular, right before that, when he says the mystery of the gospel, the mystery of Christ, the mystery of the Messiah. God, will you allow me to share the mystery of who you are? And what's been working out through the text of Colossians, this mystery, is that the grace of God is for everyone. This is the clarity that he wants to speak. Not that he has all the right answers when we get into this theology and how this theology. That's not where Paul is going. Paul's saying, I just want the clarity for people to see the beauty of Jesus Christ. And that they would see that grace is for everyone. There's this argument that's happening here in Colossae about that the gospel really isn't for the Gentiles. This mystery that he's talking about is the mystery that the gospel is for everyone. That we ought to be praying for the opportunity for everyone around us to share the gospel of Jesus Christ that says the gospel is for you. It doesn't matter your sin. It doesn't matter what family you're from. It doesn't matter how much money you have or you don't have. None of those things matter. The gospel of Jesus Christ is for everyone. God, help me share the gospel with clarity. Help people see by my words when I speak to them. So we're going to move in here in just a minute to deeds, but before we get there, we must understand that evangelism is a declaration of the gospel, is a declaration of Jesus Christ and what he has done, is a declaration of Colossians chapter 1. How will they not know if someone doesn't tell them? Before we can move to deeds and before we can move to how we speak, we must understand that the gospel requires that we share with our words about Jesus Christ. And we're praying that God would give us opportunity and that we'll be able to do that with clarity. We ought to be preparing ourselves for those moments, those opportunities that come, that we'll be able to share clearly the gospel of Jesus Christ. The second thing, after you've prayed, after we've been devoted for prayer, after you really give yourself to praying for opportunity for share and for clarity to share the gospel, he says that we must have wise conduct. Verse 5, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the time. See, when we couple our words of the gospel with living a life for the message of the gospel, when you put words and deeds together, they have power. So when people see you sharing, when they hear you sharing the gospel, when they hear your words, and they match up your words with a life that's been lived for the glory of God, there's incredible power when those two things come together. See, if you share and you try to share the gospel, but you don't live wisely, you don't live for the gospel, then people are confused. It doesn't make sense. I hear you saying this, but I don't see you really living it. I'm confused. Is this God as great as you say he is? And why aren't you dependent on this God? And over here you're living your life like however you want? When they see us repenting of our sin, when they see us confessing when we've made mistakes, they will see the gospel. I'm not saying that we have to live perfect. I'm saying we live according to the gospel, which says we live for the glory of God. And when we don't, when we make mistakes, that we find ourselves running to the cross. We find ourselves asking people for forgiveness. And see, every day we have moment after moment where we have the opportunity to live the gospel with our lives. People are watching us. If we're declaring that Jesus is the Messiah and he is the way to life, he is the way to salvation, he is the one who can forgive us of our sins, he is the one who is worthy of all of our praise, he is the one who we want to live for. People are watching you. They're watching your lives. They're watching how you live. They're watching to see if these things match up. They're watching to see how you treat the stranger, how you treat your enemy or your opponent. They're watching to see how you treat your roommate, how you treat your friends, how you treat your boss, how you treat your coworkers, how you treat the people around you that are really hard to like. College students, they're watching to see how you treat that teacher who won't bump your C to a B. I gave you that last minute assignment. How you treat your parents, how you treat your siblings. People are watching us. They're watching to see how we're living our lives, how we're treating other people, how we're treating our family, how we're treating our kids, all around us, how we're treating the guy who didn't get us our food fast enough at the restaurant. They're watching us and they're wanting to see, are we going to be a people who are living the love of Jesus Christ? Are we living like a people who have been completely redeemed, who have been completely forgiven, who have been completely changed? Are we living for the glory of God? And then Paul says they're making the best use of the time. I love that phrase. I use it often with the college students, that we walk in wisdom toward these outsiders, that we would be wise in the way that we walk, that they might see the gospel of Jesus Christ, making the most of the time or redeeming the time. Every moment in our life is just filled with these opportunities to live out the gospel, certainly to share the gospel with words, but also to live out them in word and or deed. This idea of redeeming the time or making the use of the time kind of has, I think within us, when we think about that, we think of a coupon. It's like we have all of these moments where we have these coupons that we have the opportunity to redeem. But what happens is these moments come and then they go, and we'll never have those chances again. We're given these coupons over and over that have these moments of expiration. I had a birthday recently, and I got in the mail, an email, a coupon for a free popcorn. No strings attached. I didn't have to buy anything to get the free thing. It was just, happy birthday, here's a free thing. And I kept looking at that, and I was like, man, I need to go redeem this. I need to go to the movie because I want my free popcorn, because who doesn't like movie theater popcorn, right? And so I'm thinking that, and then moment and day after day goes by, and then suddenly I look and I go, oh man, it's expired. I'll never be able to get the chance to get free popcorn again until maybe my next birthday. I got to wait a whole nother year. But that's how our lives are filled with these moments, these opportunities to both live the gospel in deed and to share the gospel in word. And we're given these moments after moment. And the question is, will we take the opportunity to redeem the coupon and to make the most of our time? And some of you in here, you got less time than some of the others, but in reality, none of us really have that long in the whole scheme of things. I think it's easy for us, particularly if we just kind of assume, well, we're going to be here another week, we're going to be here another year, we're going to be another 10 years, whatever. I'll get to that. Now, this idea of sharing the gospel is it's got to be right now. When we leave this place, we've got to be looking for the opportunities to take advantage, to redeem the time, to share the gospel. Not only for our sake, but for someone else's sake. This may be the last time that they have the chance to hear the gospel. Or maybe we redeem this coupon and then somebody else will redeem a coupon. Somebody else will redeem their time. And suddenly they've heard the gospel 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And finally they understand and they see the beauty of Jesus Christ just because you chose to be obedient and share the gospel. See, I think we have in our minds this idea that when we share the gospel that they have to trust in the Lord or pray the prayer or whatever, or we failed. That's not what it is. Being obedient is just, on our part, is just to redeem the time. Share the gospel. Live the gospel. Just be the ambassadors of Christ that He's called us to be. And we'll be thankful. Like in our prayer, we'll be thankful when God does the work, when God brings someone to salvation. But you and I, when we leave this place we live, we're just looking for moments to redeem the time. Share the gospel. The last thing, now we're praying, we're thinking, we're sharing both in word and deed. The last thing he gives them, the last word of wisdom here that he gives them, verse 6, your speech should always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. So if conduct is how we're living the gospel, gracious speech is how we're speaking the gospel. That our speech should always be gracious. It should be kind. It should be merciful. I like to think of when I try to share the gospel with someone that I'm giving them a gift. Like my mom and stepdad came in this weekend. Like I said, I had a birthday, and Micah, our youngest, had a birthday, and so they came in, and Kaylee has a birthday coming up, and so they came bearing gifts. My mom did not come and say, here's your stinking gift. She didn't do that. Like, I hope you appreciate this gift. No, that's not how you give a gift, right? I hope you don't. If you do, we got a problem. Don't come to my birthday party, right? Oh, here's a gift. I hope you like it. I hope it's something that you come with a heart that's gracious. Not demanding anything from us. It's gracious and it's kind. How we speak of the gospel, how we speak of Jesus Christ, when people hear the tone in which we speak, the tone in which particularly speaking of the gospel. I like Paul says here that it should be seasoned with salt. Right? I know as I've gotten older, my taste buds have changed, but I can remember when I was younger, having to go to things like Thanksgiving were not really great for me because I was a very picky eater. But what I realized somewhere in the middle there is that you could take a green bean casserole, which was I enjoy now, but back then that was just awful. I mean, that was just terrible. And if you put enough salt on that thing, you could eat it, right? I love this picture about us sharing the gospel, that when people hear us share the gospel, it ought to be like food that's seasoned with salt. It ought to just make their mouth water. It ought to just be like, not literally, figuratively, right? That, man, this is so good. This sounds so good. Now, I'm not saying we leave out the part about sin and that we're sinners. I'm not saying that we change the gospel. I'm just saying the tone in which we share it is loving and caring. Even the hard parts, people would say yes. People would hear the care and concern in your voice. When people hear us speak about Christ, it shouldn't be boring. It shouldn't be from a heart that's boring or flavorless or, all right, I got to share the gospel. Here you go. Here it is. No, it's, man, this has changed my life. This has impacted me in an incredible way. And I just want to give you this gift and I just want to share it with you because I care about you and I love you. Particularly when someone comes back and they don't see it as tasteful. How are you going to respond then? When somebody wants to be argumentative back to you and they want to, well, I believe in science and I believe in this and I believe in that and you're silly for believing in Jesus and man, we want to puff up and we like stick our chest out and like, let's take care of this outside, whatever. That's not being gracious with our speech. I'm not saying there aren't times where we need to be firm. There aren't times when man, we've got to stand for the truth of the gospel. Are we going to stand in a way that's gracious? Are we see gracious speech, what it does, it reflects the gospel because the gospel is filled with grace. We were enemies. We were against the gospel, and God was gracious to us. Okay, I want to close here with just 3 quick questions that might help us as we're thinking about this. The first one is, how often do you pray for an opportunity for you or yourself to share the gospel? I mean, are you really spending time devoted, diligently praying, God, God, would you just help me share the gospel? Would you help me see the world around me the way you see it? God, help me share the gospel. Number 2, do you view the conduct of your life as a partner to sharing the gospel with your words? Do you see the two coming together? Are you overly dependent on your life? That's part of the question. Well, I'm just going to live the gospel and then hope that they see Jesus. Listen, if you just live your gospel and you never share the gospel, they're not going to understand. They're not going to know. They're going to look at you and go, oh, he's a nice guy. She's a nice girl. When we put the two together, when you see them as a partner, when you see your words and your deeds, man, they just are incredibly powerful. You see the two coming together as a partner. And the last one is, how do you speak of Christ? How are you speaking of Christ? Are you argumentative? Are you harsh? Is God just kind of this fairy tale, like, hey, there's the big man upstairs? Are you speaking about him in gracious, relational terms? What about the things you're writing, the tone of the things that you're writing on Facebook or social media? Somebody puts something out there you don't like. Do you respond with graciousness? And God has given us an incredible opportunity to be ministers of the gospel, to leave this place. Can you imagine what it would be like? Just think about this. A church who said, we are going to be fully devoted to praying and sharing the gospel. We're going to be fully devoted to praying that God would use us, that God would give us opportunity after opportunity to clearly present the gospel to people. And that we're going to do it in graciously. We're going to speak graciously, and we're going to have these wise deeds. Imagine what a church of 400 people, if we decided to leave this place, and this is what we were going to do. We were going to be obedient to God, saying that this is what I'm going to be devoted. I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray consistently and pray earnestly. God, give me opportunity to share the gospel. And we're going to try our best to do it with clarity. We're going to try our best to do it with gracious words. And we're going to try to live our lives in such a way that when we share the gospel, people would see, yes, I've seen that in your life. I know, and these things would come together. What would happen is we would see people come to Christ. And we'd be able to go back to the beginning, and we'd now be praying thanksgiving. God, thank you for what you've done. God wants to use us. God wants to use a church of people who would say, I want to be devoted to living my life for the gospel and sharing the gospel with my words. That is a church that God wants to use.